Good morning, everyone. I am John471, and this is your opening swing. Today is Monday, April 28th, 2025. Allow me to read our disclaimer. Derivatives trading is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. On to what we have today. As I mentioned, it's Monday, April 28th. There is really no scheduled news of note coming out of the U.S. We have at 10:30 EST, we have the Dallas Fed. That's about it. A few short-term auctions. We do have Trump on the calendar at 5, and he's meeting with the Eagles. So have your news feeds on. Who knows what will happen? There's also some rhetoric coming out from the ECB, so we should be aware of that. And a few earnings before the bell. So that's what we have today. As noted, today is Monday. We are going to be getting the employment situation this week on Friday. So this being the Monday before non-farm, there is potential for a little bit more activity earlier in the week. Usually, in a normal week, I expect kind of Monday to sort of open up, give us an idea of what's going on. Tuesday and Wednesday to kind of show us what the week wants to do. But when we have NFP, such a huge number on Friday, it's not uncommon. I've noticed, and this is just my observations, it's not uncommon to see a little bit more activity earlier in the week as participants look to square up ahead of the number. Let's take a look at some charts here. So this is the S&P 500. This is a full session chart, daily candles. The profiles you see, the pink ones are monthly, and these blue and orange ones are yearly. So that means that this big profile here is all of 2024, and this big profile here is 2025 so far. What can we see just by looking at this? Well, 2024 was a great year to own U.S. equities, wasn't it? It was wonderful. And then what happened? We missed the high. We were unable to take out the high, even though we opened very close to the all-time highs, and we released lower. So that's what we see, and we did take the low of the prior year, find quick support, and revert higher. So that's just very big picture what we've seen so far. What I want to draw your attention to here is this CVPOC. Allow me to grab the Epic pen quickly. Okay, so Epic pen in hand. So let's get rid of these monthly profiles for a second and just consider a few things here while we have the larger time frame. So this is our CVPOC, which for those that aren't aware, that this is the most traded price in this whole area of trade. This began, well, it's been going back a while, but all of 2024 and 2025, this is the most traded price. And it's 58.2175. What else is worth noticing? Well, I'll tell you what I'm noticing. That's that here's our all-time high, pull back, attempt to take the all-time high, failed, so we didn't get our all-time high. And then what we see is this release lower. Just something to be aware of, this release lower, and then we hit this area of battle. Please excuse the horrible drawings. I'm just trying to kind of call your attention to the right places. So release lower, battleground right here. And then what happened after this? Another release lower, okay? So what am I noticing? First, I'm noticing that the magnitude of this second push is actually equal or greater, depending on where you started from, than the second one. It's like we kind of had this area sort of balancing. We pushed to the bottom, we fought it, and then we released. So we had a very strong push lower from this area. So I'm considering this area to be offered at this point. Not really, we can't gather too much from what might happen next, but we can say that the quorum of participants that needed to sell at this price was pretty strong. We pushed it pretty far. But anyway, so we're back here now. We look at the whole drop. We've recovered 50% of it. 55.37 and 3/4 is the 50% line of it. So we've recovered quite a bit of this drop so far. Zooming in, though, let's take a look at what's going on a little bit more of a granular level. Put the monthly profiles back up. And we see that we're in a monthly time frame. We're one time framing lower. This area of fight I talked about was essentially just the month of March. So March was a big old fight. And you see that we're pushing up, trying to get back into this area. Where is our first target once we get back into the month of March? It's March's VPOC, which is the 5671 area, if we're able to keep pushing into there. What's our second target? You guessed it, the big one. Also note that these VWAPs here are, the red one is the VWAP beginning at 2025, and the brown one is the VWAP from the all-time high. So we're below the VWAPs of those references, just to point out. If we push lower, so I just gave us just on a big picture, what happens if we can recover the March range and hold? We're obviously looking for the March VPOC. If we can keep going, we're looking for the CVPOC above. What happens if we can't hold these prices on this time frame? Well, you said it, you guessed it. We're looking for our developing VPOC of April. That's big picture. We're going to start zooming in, starting now. Here we are. These are 30-minute bars, daily profiles, RTH only. And just to kind of reacclimate ourselves to where we were, this is the March range that we talked about. And here's obviously our April range that we are trying to claw out of. Up here, we see our March VPOC, and March settle is in confluence with additional auction targets. We have singles left up there. Above, we have the tariff news, SOC, the naked VPOC. And just moving our way up, we eventually get to the 5821 CVPOC that I talked about. What's in the way? Well, it looks like a gap zone right there in the way. What is down below? Well, the CV or the MCVPOC of this whole area is 5,300 right here in this area. This is the center of mass. So you see we have this gap zone here and this MCVPOC. Then we have this gap zone here and this MCVPOC. So once again, the S&P 500 has given us pretty good odds in both directions, which is the way it goes. Although we are pushing higher, so my bias is going to be initially bullish here. Just from this larger chart, how can we kind of like map out what we want to do here today or what might happen? Well, I've been talking a lot about the 4-9 day with our highs right here, the 5520s. We've just grinded through that. We've just a grind. Like there was clearly an offer right here, a lot of willing sellers, and it was just like feeding a log into a wood chipper. We just powered through it, and now we're trading the gap zone. So that's what we walk into today. We can also see that we have 3 days of one-time framing up after a gap zone. Also, we should be aware of just kind of look at this area of trade. You know, this was where we opened here, then we pushed lower to attempt to kind of close this gap or whatever. And we didn't close this gap, not really even close. And then we just saw, this is like a spring compressing right here. We pushed into a spring, the spring compressed, and boom, pushed higher. And then we've just kind of found support here on pullbacks and have kept going. We have unauctioned areas ahead of our gap zone right here with the single prints. So for me, this is really the key area right here, right around the prior week's VPOC, right around yesterday's low. This is where, this is where the sellers tried and then the buyers won here. And the trend began right there, in my opinion. This is kind of the area that we're curious about. So just on a very big picture idea here, if this kind of trajectory holds, like if we just stay within this channel, well, we know what's going to happen. If we stay within this channel, we know what targets we're going to look for. What if we break this channel? Well, if we break this channel, the first thing that I would look for is a test of this unauctioned area and potentially support. It could potentially be support. Or we could test into this unauctioned area, expect it to be support, push higher, be unable to get the prior high, and then we're going to start looking at, we're stuck in this range right now. Those are the three big picture things that could happen that we want to be aware of. Let's go to a smaller time frame chart and plan for more specific price action. Okay, so here we are. This is actually a smaller time frame chart. We're looking at a 1x5, 1 point by 5 PNF, but I think it's appropriate. And let's discuss our scenarios for today. We'll begin with bullish scenarios because at the outset of today, I'm more bullish. However, that does not necessarily have to persist. The market can change. The market is just a flow of impermanent of impermanence. Like whatever you have to get used to, whatever you see is constantly changing, and that's actually a very important part of doing this, of just accepting that what we're looking at is in a constant state of change, and what's the most expected behavior in this moment could easily change. That's a fact of how markets work, and it's one of the things that screws people up the most. I didn't mean to go into this today, but it's worth going into. It's worth mentioning because that's one of the biggest things that throws off traders, is not being aware that exactly the opposite of what they think could happen. People get too attached to their expectations, and then when their expectations don't play out, surprise happens. And surprise is actually, from an emotional standpoint, is a dangerous place to be in from an evolutionary perspective. Surprise is dangerous. So when you're too attached to your expectations and you have a surprise, that ignites the emotion that then causes errors. Be aware of that. Maybe I'll do a webinar on it for CT. Regardless, we're here for scenarios. Let's get into it. Bullish ideas. Okay, so what we see here is we opened and we ground lower right into this zone, put in an overnight low, and then popped higher. Now we have this area of structure right here. That's interesting, huh? Let's take a look at the prior day's profile. Very clear double distribution profile. Decent taper on the low, VPOC at the high. So pretty much anyone that's spent time at Convergent will know that this key LVN is a pretty easy LIS for long or short. So if we end up just holding this LVN, like if we don't take out this LVN, I would just expect us to drift higher, take the overnight low, holding this zone, potentially pullbacks, however it works. But I would expect excursion higher. Our targets, as I've mentioned here, we have gap mid, and then essentially this zone to target ahead of gap close. Continuing higher through here, we would have the auction targets I talked about after this, which include, we don't even really have to go too far into this, but prior month's settle and the prior month's VPOC here. So basically what I'm saying here is if we just hold this LVN and we can get into this gap zone, then that would sort of be that trending situation that I mentioned, where I would just be looking for higher prices if we sort of can get to each of these zones, looking for gap mid and then potentially gap close. Beyond gap close, it would just be a runner for me. This could also happen in a very explosive way. We could just kind of test and then push and just sort of reprice to like gap mid and then start to trend from there. Could we take out this overnight low and still have a bullish day today? We could, but I think it would have to be a pretty quick test, like meaning fall into this area, all of a sudden all the early longs are kind of upset. Everyone doesn't know what's going to happen. It gets real choppy here, but we're preserving the low, maybe finding some support on Century, and then give us an impulse, and then boom, we're back on to the whole bullish idea. So that's what I'm basically saying. If we drop into this area, this would still be viable for me. It's not like I wouldn't be buying it, but I would be open to a setup, ideally with an impulse that shows me that we tested this area and then we got out of it because there are no more sellers. So those are pretty much the ways that I would look for things to be bullish. It would be easiest if we just kind of hold this area and we get something tradable from it to target where we want to go. But if we don't, then we may drop into this area, in which case it could be a bearish move, but how we kind of act in this area would tell the tale, and the impulse would be the key that it was a dip. How could bearish ideas happen? Oh, just to reiterate, we start moving higher targets, as if I haven't said it 600 times, gap mid, gap close, or this zone, and then from there, zone to zone to our runner targets above, which we talked about in the higher time frames. All right, let's discuss some bearish ideas. How could this go bearish? Well, it really could. We really could end up going bearish here. And how would that look? Well, first of all, we see that there are sellers here, the way that we've pushed, the way that we've kind of ground into this area. However, buyers are stepping up and absorbing. But if sellers keep loading the offer, which they're kind of doing here, we could continue to trend in kind of a grinding way lower. How would that look? Well, we would likely make some small attempt higher early. I think it would be less likely for it to get the overnight high, but it could. But regardless, I would expect some attempt to go higher, that just kind of doesn't get the juice and starts to fall back. And then the key would be, you guessed it, this zone. That is to say that if we make an attempt higher, we can't get the overnight high, or potentially we just test through and then get immediately shoved back into the overnight range, then that would tell me that maybe there are more sellers here that need to be filled at these prices. So seeing either the test higher and failure or the failure to get the overnight high, we could be grinding into these prices. This, to me, I think it would be likely, if we start to trade lower, it would be a grindy kind of downtrend. And what do I mean by that? The price action that I would kind of most expect to see is sort of impulsive pushes higher that don't get the prior high and look like you want to buy them, but then they just kind of get like someone throws a wet blanket over them and they just get like kind of ground back in. So a trade kind of looks like this: grinding, grinding, grinding. Impulse, oh, is it good? No, it's not. And it just starts to grind lower. And everyone's like, oh, I want to buy this. Oh, wait, no, I should have sold that. And then you get frustrated and you try to sell this, and then you get stopped out when it does that. Don't do that. But anyway, so this would be the bearish idea: either test and failure, or just offers loading up, and then we start to grind. If we grind and we push lower into this area, like I said, this is the question mark where we could just exhaust all the sellers and impulse. But if we don't, if we instead are unable to really meaningfully get back above this key LVN, once we fall through it, then I would be open to targets below. Century would obviously be the first target if we try to get back out of this area and we can't, the prior low. And then if we cannot, if we start to push through Century, then I would be open to a test of the 1 time frame break, yesterday's RTH low. Now here's the thing, this is a huge target. If this gets hit, just like any time we see a test of the prior day's extreme or 1 time framing, whatnot, there is a possibility that we just hit this zone, we give kind of a tight zipper and attempt lower, and then we push higher, and that's called a lick check, and then we're just back into the upward trajectory of the trade. That's a possibility. However, if we actually get here today, I would tend to think there's a possibility we might look like we want to see that, and then actually just flush down to take out at least the first set of our singles. So that would be my bearish idea. If we test the prior day's low and we don't lick check, I would not be surprised to see a push lower into this zone. This is basically our 33 zone right around here. Into here, this would be the extended target for me below the prior day's low. Hitting this target, then it would all be about, can we recover the prior day's range? If we can recover the prior day's range, then this is a test lower, and we're probably going to just seep back higher, just in that very frustrating, no pullback kind of way. That could happen. But if we get that target and then we can't get back into range, then I would just be looking for excursion lower, zone to zone. And our key target below, eventually I wouldn't expect it to get hit today, but would be the 5300 MCV puck that I mentioned. What could a nothing day be today? Our nothing day would really be anything in range, in my opinion, that preserves the low and pushes the high in a way that's hard to trade. So it could be our just like, random trend idea. That could happen and just be really hard to get on, not give us too much. Or we could get a very quick repricing lower through this key LVN that everybody wants to trade off of. This happens a lot, where we push into this area that the traders want to trade. Instead of making it a place we can trade, it just gets chopped up, because OTF just isn't ready to make a decision. So all the little traders just get chopped around trying to trade their idea, and their idea clearly doesn't work. If your idea is not working, figure it out quickly and don't waste money on it. So that's what I got today. I think that's pretty complete. Really, if you're keying off one area today, it's going to be this area. If we hold it from above, we're looking for the high, we're looking for gap mid. If we lose it, we're looking for a test of Century. Century could be support where we get back above it very quickly, but if we hit Century and then we can't get back above this area, then we're open to excursion lower. The 1 time frame break is the key area on the key area lower, where we could lick check and rip higher, or just disappoint the longs and just seep lower. Seeping lower, then we have this zone between our 2 singles, which will be our next decision area. But that's what I got for you. 21 minutes. I got to stop it here. I have to. That's what I got. We're looking to potentially add some scenarios for crude this week. So stay tuned for that. I appreciate all the feedback from everyone. Please keep the feedback coming because I want to be responsive to what's working for those that are watching. So understand that I read all of your comments and feedback is appreciated, and I will be responsive to it. So that's what we got today. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. I hope your wonderful day continues. And most importantly, I hope you find some way to improve your trading today that is not dependent upon your trading results. Any questions, ask me in the Discord. Always happy to chat. All right, that's what we got today, everybody. Let's get out there and clock those ticks. Ciao.